The desert is a place where time forgets to move, where the silence stretches like old skin across the bones of the earth. Out there, beneath a sky the color of blood and forgiveness, exile is not always a punishment. It is sometimes a mirror. The land speaks not in mercy, but in memory. And memory is the cruelest judge. Wyanna had learned long ago that survival was not a loud thing. It was not a scream or a sprint. It was the soft endurance of breath, the subtle tightening of the jaw when someone called you less than whole. She had survived many things: hunger, drought, the sudden loss of her mother's laughter, but nothing like what came that spring in Mercy's wake. It was a town of hard men and harder women, all wrapped in faith and dust. The kind of place where sins were carved into pews and virtue wore a badge. They called her Wildflower, not out of affection but disdain. Her presence, with her silence and her soft-spoken defiance, threatened the delicate arrangement of power where women obeyed and men were gods in their own houses. When Reverend Elijah Finch declared his son had chosen her for marriage, the town treated it as divine order. A gift, they said. The boy, Thomas Finch, had the face of a carved angel and the heart of a snake. He watched Wyanna not with affection but possession. Like someone admiring a stallion they meant to break. The proposal wasn't made with kindness. It was delivered like scripture, immutable, holy, final. In front of the entire congregation, Thomas stood beside his father and said, "I will have her." Wyanna looked up from her woven shawl and met the boy's eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply said no. The word was not shouted. It echoed louder than any sermon. Gasps moved through the church like prairie fire. Some laughed nervously, thinking it a misunderstanding. Others narrowed their eyes. The Reverend's face turned to stone. Thomas's pride blistered before everyone. His fists clenched, and he stepped forward like a boy denied a toy. "You don't understand," he said. "You don't say no to me." "I do now," she said calmly, "and I always will." It should have ended there. But pride is a dangerous thirst, especially in the mouths of those who preach humility. A town meeting was called. The verdict was cruel and wrapped in scripture. "Let her be tested by the land, as Eve was by Eden," declared Reverend Finch. "Let her heart be softened by hunger and solitude." Wyanna said nothing as they tied her hands with prayer beads and led her to the edge of Black Hollow Ridge. She made no sound when they pushed her from the cart and left her among the bones of cattle and wind. She did not cry. She did not plead. Her eyes never left the horizon. Martha Finch, wife of the Reverend, leaned from the cart before it turned. "Maybe now you'll learn grace." Wyanna replied, "I already have. That's why I'm not afraid." And then they left her there. The wind rose like a warning as she untied her wrists on the sharp edge of a broken stone. The desert gave her no welcome, but she did not need one. She had spent her life being uninvited. The first night was the hardest. The cold crept like regret into her bones. Her feet bled from walking. Her lips cracked from silence. She kept moving, not because she hoped to be rescued, but because stillness felt like surrender. In her mind, she heard her grandmother's voice. "Keep walking, even when the world says stop." On the third day, her water skin empty, her breath shallow, she stumbled across a dry arroyo littered with bones. Coyotes watched from a distance, eyes flickering like lost stars. She fell once, then again. The sun was punishing, indifferent. Her heartbeat was a faltering drum. She crawled to the base of a withered Joshua tree and curled against its trunk, dizzy from sun and shame. Her eyelids drooped like torn cloth. She saw faces in the sand. Her mother, the old women who taught her how to gather sage, the children who used to braid her hair. She whispered one word, "Home." Then the shadow passed. At first, she thought it was death, tall, wide-shouldered, riding a dark horse with a limp. But when the figure dismounted and knelt beside her, she smelled leather and tobacco instead of brimstone. A cool hand touched her brow. A whisper, low and steady. "You still breathing?" She opened her eyes and blinked at the man. His face was lined with sun and sorrow, his eyes a mismatched pair, one sharp as flint, the other milky and pale. He gave her water, not in great gulps, but measured sips. He carried her, not with urgency, but reverence. And when she woke again, it was to the crackle of a fire and the scent of coffee and pine. "I'm Silas Crowley," he said, stirring embers with a stick. "Found you back there looking like a ghost someone forgot to bury." She didn't speak. He didn't press. The night pressed in around them like a slow breath. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out. Silas glanced over. "You ain't from around here, are you?" Still, she said nothing. That was fine. He was a man accustomed to silence. He wore his own like armor. But as he poured a cup of bitter coffee and offered it to her, her fingers touched his. Brief. Fleeting. Enough. The fire cracked between them. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. And for the first time since the desert opened its arms to swallow her, Wyanna did not feel alone. Silas Crowley hadn't planned to ride north again. The land up here held too many ghosts, and he'd long made peace with leaving the dead where they chose to rest. But something about the woman lying half-conscious in his saddle blanket made retreat feel like cowardice. He was not a man prone to mercy, yet there was something about her, not fragile, not begging, but quietly unbroken. A flicker of will, even in sleep. It haunted him. He built their fire under a natural stone overhang shaped like a bent shoulder. The wind howled some nights, but this place offered protection from both storm and eyes. She spoke little in the first days, drank only when coaxed, ate only when he turned his back. But Silas watched her from the corner of his good eye, patient as a vulture. On the fourth evening, she finally said, "Why did you help me?" He glanced at her across the firelight. "Didn't look like you were planning to help yourself." A pause, then a small sound, not quite laughter but the ghost of it. She stirred the stew with a twig, steam brushing her cheeks. The flames painted her skin in amber and gold, like the brush of an unseen artist trying to remember the shape of courage. "What's your story, Silas Crowley?" she asked. He shrugged. "A long one. Most of it bad. I have time." He leaned back, eyes fixed on the stars overhead. "Used to ride for the army. Scout. Good at tracking. Better at disappearing. Then the war ended, and I didn't know who I was without someone telling me where to go." She looked at him, measuring. "I'm not afraid of men who follow orders," she said. "I'm afraid of men who like giving them." "I don't give many," he replied, voice roughened by memory. "Not anymore." Their silences were not empty. They were thick with observation, with pieces of themselves they slowly offered up, like embers passed from hand to hand. Wyanna began to speak in fragments, of her mother's medicine songs, of her brothers lost to sickness, of a home that shrank every time the world told her she didn't belong. Silas listened, and listening, in his world, was a rare form of devotion. One morning, Wyanna stood before him, holding her braid like a blade. "I want to go back." Silas didn't flinch. "Back to Mercy's wake?" She nodded. "They'll try to finish what they started." "They didn't finish it the first time," she said. "And I don't want to survive. I want to return." Standing, he studied her, noted the fire rising behind her eyes. Not reckless, but rooted. "You'll need to be ready." "I am." They began the journey in silence. But silence between them had become something holy. Each night, he taught her small things, a knife grip, how to read the land, how to watch a man's eyes for truth. She practiced without pride, learning not to defend herself with rage, but with certainty. Her body strengthened, her resolve sharpened. On the fifth night, Silas gave her a gift, a hatchet with a polished handle. "It belonged to my mother," he said. Wyanna touched it reverently. "Why give it to me?" "Because she was the bravest person I ever knew." Until now, she didn't thank him. Not aloud. She held the blade like a vow. Mercy's wake came into view on the seventh sunrise, its steeple rising from dust like a finger pointing at the heavens. The town looked smaller now, dwarfed by the things they'd survived. But evil doesn't always wear size. It wears custom, law, the familiar weight of a neighbor's stare. They rode in side by side. People stopped, eyes widened. Murmurs fluttered from porch to porch like moths drawn to scandal. Wyanna didn't lower her gaze. Martha Finch stood frozen on the steps of the chapel, her Bible pressed to her chest like armor. "She returns," someone whispered, "with a man." The outlaw, someone else added. The church doors opened. Reverend Finch emerged, robe stiff in the breeze, face pale with fury. You defy God with this parade? He spat. I defy you, Wyanna answered, voice steady. And I come to take back what was stolen, my name, my place, my dignity. You were cast out, he roared. You spat in the face of good man. Silas dismounted, slow and deliberate. He stood at her side, silent but solid. No one owns her, he said quietly, and no man has the right to break what he cannot control. The Reverend turned to the crowd. Do you see? This is what happens when pride is left unchecked. She returns with a stranger, defiling herself and our town. A rustle of unease moved through the townsfolk. They had seen Thomas Finch in the weeks after Wyanna's exile, drunk, angry, mean. The golden boy had cracked. Deputy Hank Greeley stepped forward. Let her speak, he said, voice rough with restraint. And speak she did. Wyanna stepped forward, eyes blazing. She spoke of what had been done in the name of religion, of the cowardice that hid behind sanctity, of the women who watched but said nothing. She named her pain without trembling. She carved her truth into the air so no one could look away. I was not broken, she said. I was forged. Martha Finch opened her mouth to interrupt, but something in Wyanna's eyes made her stop. Reverend Finch sneered. This is blasphemy. No, said Silas. This is justice, and you're not the judge here. The Reverend reached for the pistol beneath his coat, but before it could rise, Hank's hand shot out. Enough. The gun fell to the dirt. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was recognition. In that moment, the town saw what they had done and what she had become. Wyanna turned and walked from the square, not fast, not triumphant, but sure. Silas followed, his step just behind hers, not leading, not dragging, but matching. Behind them, Mercy's wake stood still. They didn't look back. The night air hung heavy with a strange stillness as Wyanna and Silas left Mercy's wake behind them. The town streets, once alive with judgment and whispered condemnations, now felt hollow, an echo chamber for their own shame. Yet, beneath that emptiness, something new had taken root, fragile and fierce, dignity reclaimed. The stars overhead stretched out like the eyes of ancestors, watching, waiting. Wyanna felt the weight of every step, not the burden of exile, but the weight of return. She was no longer the frightened girl left to die in the desert, nor the woman who silently bore the town's cruelty. She was something else, something whole. Silas rode beside her, the quiet shadow that had become her unexpected companion. His pale eye caught the moonlight like a distant promise, and she trusted that he was more than the man fate had cast him to be. There was a kindness in his silence, a patience that mirrored her own. They camped near a small spring, its water cool and clear like a secret whispered. The fire crackled between them, flames dancing with memories neither spoke aloud. Wyanna traced the rough grain of the hatchet's handle, Silas's gift, a symbol, he said, of courage. It's strange, she murmured, how something as small as a blade can carry so much meaning. Silas nodded. My mother used to say the same, that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest things that cut deepest. Their eyes met, the firelight reflecting something unspoken, a beginning perhaps. The days that followed were slow, deliberate. They moved through the wilderness like two souls stitched together by necessity and growing trust. Silas taught her how to read the signs of the earth, the patterns of birds, the scent of rain and dry air, the subtle shifts in wind that whispered of coming storms. Wyanna, in turn, shared stories of her people, the songs of the Lakota, the lessons carried in the rings of trees, the prayers woven into the breeze. She spoke softly, her voice a thread that wove between them, knitting distance into closeness. One evening, as the sun bled its last over the horizon, Silas broke the silence. Do you believe in second chances? She considered the question, watching the shadows stretch across the land. I believe the desert teaches us that even when all seems lost, something waits to be found. He smiled then, a slow, weary curve that softened the hard edges of his face. Maybe it's not about what's lost or found, but about who we choose to become in the meantime. Wyanna reached out, her fingers brushing against his. No promises, no declarations, just a quiet acknowledgement of the space between them filling with something neither dared name yet. Their journey led them to a ridge overlooking Mercy's Wake. The town lay sprawled beneath them, fragile and flawed. Wyanna's heart hammered, not with fear, but with resolve. "We go back," she said simply. Silas's gaze was steady. Together, the next morning, they rode into town again. But this time, they were not shadows to be feared or objects to be judged. They were a force, tempered by hardship and hardened by truth. As they approached the town square, whispers rose like a low tide. Faces turned, some filled with suspicion, others with reluctant admiration. Martha Finch watched from her porch, her lips pressed tight. Reverend Finch's eyes burned with unspoken fury. Wyanna dismounted, the hatchet gleaming at her side. She stood tall, the desert wind lifting her braid like a banner. "I return not to beg forgiveness," she said, voice clear and unwavering, "but to reclaim my story." The Reverend stepped forward, his voice trembling. "You defied the will of God and man alike. You brought shame to Mercy's Wake." "Shame is not mine to carry," Wyanna replied. "It belongs to those who would silence truth with fear." The crowd was silent, the tension thick as dust before a storm. Silas stepped beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder, not as a shield, but as a sign of solidarity. "Your laws are broken," he said quietly, "and your faith is hollow if it cannot hold a woman's voice." Reverend Finch's face twisted with rage, and he reached for the pistol at his hip. But before he could draw, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Enough!" Deputy Hank Greeley emerged from the crowd, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "This town needs healing, not hatred." Martha Finch's shoulders slumped, her eyes downcast. The crowd shifted, some nodding, others murmuring. Wyanna took a step forward. "Let this be the day Mercy's Wake remembers what justice truly means. Not punishment for defiance, but respect for choice." The town square seemed to exhale, the heavy weight of years lifting just enough to leaden light. Silas squeezed her shoulder gently. "You've done what many couldn't." She looked up at the sky, the vast expanse, no longer a threat, but a witness. "We've done it." That evening, beneath a tapestry of stars, Silas and Wyanna sat by a dwindling fire. Their hands found each other again, this time with no need for words. The silence between them was full, rich with promise and quiet strength. "I never thought I'd find peace," Silas said softly. "Peace is not found," Wyanna replied. "It is made piece by those who refuse to be broken." They leaned into the night, two souls no longer lost, but anchored, carrying the lessons of the desert in their hearts. And as the fire's glow faded into dawn, the world outside their small circle shifted, not because fear was gone, but because hope had finally taken root. For in the end, the desert remembered not the exile, but the woman who walked back into the storm and claimed her place beneath the endless sky.